Ford has made some changes to the Focus RS for 2018, which will be its final year in production. The price has increased, but the list of standard features now includes pretty much everything that was optional last year. The Recaro seats, navigation, these 19-inch forged wheels, and the limited slip differential, among other things, are now all standard. As a result, the base price is $41,995. The only real options are colors, Race Red and this Nitros Blue, which does cost extra at $695. There's several wheel and tire packages for summer and winter in the track, as well as the sunroof, and that's it. That makes the total somewhere around $44,000, which isn't too bad once you find out what this car is capable of. I've been wanting to experience it for a couple of years now, and I'm glad I have the opportunity to share that experience with you, because the production for 2018 will be limited to just 1,500 cars for all of North America. Now for the big question, what's it like to drive? This whole hot hatchback segment has been very popular in the European markets for the last, probably 30, 40 years almost at this point, when the Volkswagen Golf GTI and some of those cars came out. But as far as here in the United States, they just really haven't caught on like they have in Europe. I'm not 100% sure why that is. This is a fairly practical car compared to a lot of other sports cars and muscle cars that we have in the US, because it has the hatchback, so you have a lot more cargo space. You also have, in this case, a 5-door setup, so you really have 4 doors that passengers can get in. It's not necessarily the most spacious car that I've ever been in, but it is a compact car as far as that goes, but you're still getting quite a bit of performance associated with a little bit more practicality than what you would get from other sports cars, which is why I think the hot hatchback has really taken off in the European market. Plus, I just feel like everybody over here, nobody that has a family would buy a car like this, because they want to get a 3-row SUV or whatever, even if they just have one kid. So this is kind of in an interesting segment, and because of that, this is the 3rd year for it, the 2018 model Focus RS, and it's the final year for it, at least here in the United States. And they're doing kind of a limited run of these. They have a special edition of this. And I know I've read a lot of these comparisons where folks have sat down and said, how does the Focus RS compare to the Mustang? Because they want to compare these two Ford performance vehicles that have similar pricing. But I don't think you can fairly compare these cars at all. I think they're just completely different. I think they're for a totally different audience. Even if you like performance cars, there's certain things about the Mustang that you will like that this car doesn't have, and vice versa. As far as numbers, this car has a 2.3-liter turbo 4-cylinder. It puts out about 350 horsepower. The 0 to 60 time is down around that 4.5 to 4.7 second range, so it's a very quick car. Only available as a manual transmission, by the way. This is a 6-speed manual. You can't get an automatic transmission in this. And really, that's about it. Everything else is standard. Navigation is standard now for 2018. You have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as well. You have heated seats. You have a heated steering wheel. I'm a big fan of the steering wheel. I love this blue stitching, which is something that you'll get in these RS models. The carbon fiber trim looks very nice as well, and it's not overdone. It looks nice here on the handbrake. You have it on the dash up here by the extra gauges, and then on the doors as well. So it's not overdone, and it doesn't look cheap. So initial impressions of the Focus RS when you're behind the wheel. Well, it has a great feel to it as far as the steering. I like the way the shifter feels. The clutch is a little bit light for my taste. It took me a little bit to get used to that. And I know every clutch is different, but this one just seems kind of more like a feather compared to some other cars that I've driven that have a nice pushback to it. This one just seems a little light to the touch, which if you're gonna shift quickly is maybe a really good thing. You don't have to put as much effort into it, but if you are going at low speeds in a parking lot or trying to parallel park or something, it takes a little bit to get used to, and you don't want the car to jump out from under you. Now, this car is only available as a 6-speed manual. You cannot get an automatic in this car, which I think is kind of neat. I think the idea that, you know, a hot hatchback, this one is all-wheel drive. It has an extremely sophisticated all-wheel drive system. And then you throw in this manual transmission, and it makes for a driving experience that's very different from what you'll get from just about any other car on the market, which is part of what I think its appeal is. It has almost a stupid amount of power for a small hatchback. But I like the fact that they've added all-wheel drive. You know, a lot of small hatchbacks are front-wheel drive, and so you get a little bit of that torque steer, and it just seems to be that they understeer a lot easier, and they're just a little bit harder to control, as opposed to having this all-wheel drive setup, which really gives you a ton of confidence going in and out of corners. In fact, this car handles so well that you'll forget that you're driving a hatchback, because it's very flat. And a lot of that has to do with the suspension. The suspension in this car is firm to stiff. I would say some folks would find it to be too unforgiving. One of the things, as you're driving along, it does have a little bit of a vertical motion to it, especially if you're on a road that's a little bit rougher. And so that's something to keep in mind. But I think if you're wanting something that's an all-out sports car, or something that has more racing technology in it, I think you'll be ready for that. But this definitely has a firm ride, and some people will think the ride is too stiff. So I recommend that you drive it before you make the final decision, if that's something that's really important to you. I usually make a pro and con list whenever I'm driving a car here on the show, and one of the things that stands out to me as a pro and a con all at the same time, which pretty much never happens, and that's these seats. These seats are incredibly comfortable. The side bolsters, they hug you, they feel really, really nice to sit in. There's only a couple of issues with them. The number one issue is that most of the time I feel like I'm sitting up too high. In a sports car, I want to sit low, even though I know it's a hatchback. It just seems to me that, especially the bottom part of the seat here, just feels a little bit too high, and I've tried to adjust it and move it down, and it just won't go any lower than what it is right now. And so some folks are going to find that to be a little bit annoying. It took a little bit of getting used to. It actually feels like you're sitting in somewhat of a lounge chair, to be honest with you. I mean, it's a very sporty seat, and it's meant to be a racing seat. These are Recaro seats, so they're not meant to be, you know, super luxurious or anything. The materials on them are great. The way the car sits, other than just being too high, the overall feeling with your shoulders and the width of it feels good for a guy my size. So that brings me back to that pro and con difference. If you're a bigger guy than I am, well then, these may not hit you in the right places to be comfortable. As you're sliding in and out of the car, these side bolsters here where your thighs are, those thigh supports on the sides, those are a little tall, so getting in and out of the car actually can be a little bit challenging just to get yourself into the seat, because the opening with the door and the combination of those things just may make it a little bit uncomfortable. But once you're in this seat, it really does feel nice. So it's a pro and it's a con, depending on how tall you are, depending on how big of a guy or gal that you are. It depends on how this seat fits you, because this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all seat. Another con to this car is, it seems to me that it has a very small fuel tank. This car had a full tank of gas whenever I got in it, and the range is only about 260 miles on a tank, which is pretty low by modern day standards, I feel like. So that's something else to keep in mind, that because it has so much power and performance, they don't have a lot of room to put a humongous gas tank in here, because you do want the practicality and the extra seats and all those things. So it's almost like you're getting the standard gas tank from a Focus, but because this car has a turbo 4-cylinder, because it has 350 horsepower, let's be honest, I've had my foot in it most of the time, so the gas mileage is really not excellent. So if you're buying the hatchback and thinking you're going to get a compromise there, I would back off of the RS and go with the Focus ST model, which gets much better gas mileage than this does. But to be real honest, does anybody that buys a performance car like this really care that much about gas mileage? It's still better than what you'd get with some other cars in this segment. There's several different driving modes in this car. There's a normal mode, there's a sport mode, there's a track mode, and there's a drift mode, which will make anybody look like they're a professional drifter. Now, because I borrowed this car, I have not used drift mode on the video. I have used the sport mode and I have used the track mode, even though it's for track use only. And really what track mode does is it's just a little bit more of an enhanced version of sport mode, in the sense that it turns the traction and stability control off. But I really wanted to get some recordings of that exhaust note, because it pops and crackles and makes an awful lot of noise for a car that's a turbo 4-cylinder. The way the car drives, the way it handles, the fact that it's a 6-speed manual, it's a very involving car as you're driving it. It can get a little squirrely on you, especially if you turn the traction control off, because it has so much power. The all-wheel drive system is very sophisticated. The exhaust sounds great. It's a really neat car. It does cost over $40,000, which I think if you're somebody who knows about cars and you like cars, you already know a little bit about this car. Maybe you know a lot about this car, and it would make sense. But if you are somebody who doesn't know about cars, trying to explain to them that there's a Ford Focus that costs over $40,000. As I've had this car and I've told people that we were going to drive this car on the show, and I told them what it was, and then they looked at it, and you can tell the people that really like cars and know cars, they get it. But other people are like, well, what's with the big spoiler, and what's with this blue color, and why does it have Brembo brakes on a Focus, and that kind of thing. So the people that know, and those who don't, you try to explain it to them, and unless they can drive it, unless they can hear all those numbers, unless they can hear the exhaust, unless they can really get the full experience, they may not get it. I think when you tell people, I bought a Ford Focus RS, it's high performance, whatever, they're thinking of the car that their cousin got when they graduated high school or college or something. Well, it's not that car at all. If your cousin did get a Focus RS, maybe that's very lucky and good for them. But I think most people, when they hear Ford Focus, this is not the car that they picture and think of, at least not here in the United States. Coming out of any corner, you can lay into the accelerator, and it's just got so much power, and it just has such a great feel to it. It's a super fun car to drive. It really is. And you get used to the seat, and you forget about the fact that it was $42,000, because the car is so much fun to drive. There's little things here and there, yeah, that make it feel like a Focus that's quite a bit more affordable than this. But the seat, the stick shift, the exhaust, it lets you know that the car's pretty serious, even if you were blindfolded and you sat down in this car and you couldn't see this awesome blue paint, or you couldn't see the huge spoiler and these RS logos that are everywhere. They're on the seats, they're on the front end, they're on the back, they're on the spoiler, they're everywhere. So they want to make sure everybody knows, yes, this is the RS model. Like any performance car, the Focus RS has some flaws, but when it comes to passenger and cargo space, it does better than most, which is really what a hot hatchback is all about. It has the performance numbers and the feeling, that's for sure. It's an involving car to drive, not just because you can only get it with a manual transmission. It's quick in a straight line, but it's also insanely fast when it comes to cornering. As a result, the suspension is a little stiff for everyday use, even with the adaptive dampers in their softest setting. It might be hard for some to justify an over $40,000 price for a Focus hatchback, but a spin around the block will certainly cure those feelings. Its all-wheel drive system is very sophisticated, and the extra standard features for 2018 like navigation, Apple CarPlay, and the Recaro seats make the price even more justifiable. I've always been a fan of companies that produce cars that are fun to drive and provide you with a unique experience. Yes, there are other hot hatchbacks, but they don't have the same overall appeal of the Focus RS, in my opinion. It's also worth noting that the limited production numbers make it primed to become a future collectible. I want to thank the guys at Frank Fletcher Ford for letting me drive this one here on the show. I should also mention, they didn't pay me or ask me to mention them, but given the car's rarity, I wanted to make it known this one was in fact for sale when the episode was produced. Thanks for watching this edition of Phil's Morning Drive, and be sure to visit our website, philsmorningdrive.com. We'll see you next time.